Welcome, sleepy souls. I am your storyteller, Mr. Dread. Tonight, I'm here to help you drift into deep, peaceful sleep. But before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime stories. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is right now. And if there's a story you'd like to hear next, I would love to know that too. The rain had been falling for hours, a relentless curtain that blurred the road ahead into streaks of gray and silver. Hannah leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the passenger side window, watching the distorted trees pass by in shadowy silhouettes, their shapes bending with each streak of water on the glass. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles pale, the wipers swishing back and forth in their steady, monotonous rhythm. It was past midnight, and the narrow two-lane highway they'd been following for miles seemed to stretch endlessly into nowhere, with no towns, no gas stations, no sign of life. Just road, rain, and the low hum of the car's engine echoing like a lullaby for exhaustion. They hadn't planned to be here. The road trip was supposed to be fun, a little escape from work, from the routine of bills and obligations. A few stops, a few roadside diners, cheap motels, maybe even some sightseeing. But somewhere along the way, the GPS lost signal. Cell service dropped. Ethan had been too stubborn to turn back, convinced they'd find their way eventually. Now the tank was edging toward empty, and both of them were too tired to argue. They just needed a place to stop, even for a few hours. Then, through the rain and the foggy windshield, Hannah spotted it. A faint neon glow in the distance, pulsing faintly against the storm. "Look," she said, pointing ahead. Her voice was soft, yet tinged with relief. Ethan squinted, leaning forward slightly, and sure enough, a crooked sign flickered against the rain-soaked night, "Rest Easy Motel, Vacancy." The letters buzzed faintly, some of them half-lit, others dead, giving the impression the sign itself was as tired and forgotten as the road. Finally, Ethan muttered, exhaling as he guided the car off the highway and onto the gravel driveway. The motel came into view, sitting low and wide like a crouching animal. 2 stories, faded white paint peeling from the siding, rust streaks dripping from the edges of the roof like old wounds. A row of identical doors lined the front, each with a dim porch light above it, their glow sickly yellow in the rain. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for a single battered station wagon parked near the far end. The office was marked by a glowing open sign in the window, though the glass was streaked with condensation, making it look more like a warning than a welcome. Hannah shivered as they got out of the car, pulling her coat tight. The rain was colder than she expected, icy needles that stung her skin as she hurried across the lot. Ethan trailed behind, dragging their duffel bag from the back seat. The gravel crunched beneath their shoes, the sound almost unnervingly loud in the otherwise empty night. Inside, the office was small, dimly lit by a single desk lamp that cast long shadows across the wood-paneled walls. The air smelled faintly of mildew and old coffee. A brass bell sat on the counter, tarnished and worn from years of use. Behind the counter, shelves of keys hung neatly on hooks, each with a faded plastic tag dangling from it. "Hello?" Ethan called softly. There was no response. He rang the bell, the sharp ding cutting through the silence. A moment later, a door creaked open behind the counter, and an older man shuffled out. His gray hair was thin, combed over a balding head, and his uniform, if you could call it that, was a wrinkled button-down shirt tucked unevenly into dark slacks. His eyes, however, were sharp, too sharp, glittering with an intensity that seemed out of place in such a forgotten spot. "Evening," the man said, his voice raspy but polite. "Looking for a room?" "Yeah," Ethan replied, trying to sound casual, though the man's stare unsettled him. "Just for the night. We've been on the road a while." The man nodded slowly, as if he already knew. He turned to the shelves of keys, his fingers brushing along the tags before selecting one and placing it on the counter. The tag was faded, the number scratched nearly illegible, but Ethan made out a 7. "Cash only," the man said. Ethan frowned. "You don't take cards?" The man's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Not here." They exchanged a glance, but Ethan pulled a few bills from his wallet, sliding them across the counter. The man took them without looking, his eyes never leaving Ethan's face. For a moment, Ethan felt as though the man was studying him, memorizing him, as if there would be a test later. "Room 7, the man said, placing the key in Ethan's hand. "End of the row, ground floor. Checkout's at 11. "Thanks," Ethan muttered, eager to leave. As they stepped back out into the rain, Hannah leaned closer. "Did he seem weird to you?" Ethan shrugged, though unease prickled the back of his neck. "Small-town type. Probably doesn't get many visitors out here." They found room 7 easily, its porch light buzzing faintly as moths battered themselves against the glass. The door stuck slightly before opening, creaking as if it hadn't been moved in years. Inside, the room smelled faintly of bleach and something else, something metallic, like rust or dried blood. The furniture was old but functional, a double bed with a floral bedspread, a small nightstand with a lamp, a TV sitting on a low dresser. A cracked mirror hung on the wall opposite the bed, reflecting their tired faces. "Not exactly the Ritz," Hannah muttered, setting her bag down. Ethan chuckled softly. "We'll survive. Just need a few hours of sleep." He locked the door, though the lock felt flimsy, more symbolic than secure. They collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion swallowing them whole. The rain drummed steadily on the roof, a lullaby against the creeping unease that lingered in the corners of the room. Hannah closed her eyes, trying to ignore the faint hum of the neon sign outside, the occasional creak of the building settling. But just before sleep claimed her, she thought she heard something, faint footsteps in the hallway outside, too slow, too deliberate, like someone pacing back and forth in front of their door. When she opened her eyes, the room was still. Ethan was already asleep. The footsteps were gone. She told herself it was nothing. Just nerves. Just the motel. But deep down, something about this place felt wrong. And tomorrow morning, when they woke, the nightmare would begin. Hannah woke with a start, her chest tight, as if she had been holding her breath for hours. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her swam in a dull yellow haze, the plaster cracked in jagged lines like veins stretching outward from the single light fixture. A faint hum rattled in the walls, the sound of old wiring fighting to stay alive. She sat up slowly, the bedsheets heavy and stiff, carrying the faint smell of detergent and something older, something stale that no amount of bleach could hide. Ethan stirred beside her, groaning softly, his arm flopping across the mattress as though he were searching for her in his sleep. Hannah swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet meeting the thin carpet, damp and spongy in a way that made her recoil. She frowned, pulling her feet back up. The rain had stopped, but the room felt heavy with moisture, as though the storm had seeped through the very walls. It took her a moment to realize what was wrong. The room looked exactly as it had the night before. Not just in the way a motel room always looks the same when you wake up, but precisely. The floral bedspread was folded in the exact same awkward crease near the foot of the bed. The television remote lay at the same crooked angle on the dresser, pointing toward the cracked mirror. Even her duffel bag, which she had nudged slightly to the side before crawling into bed, now sat neatly at the foot of the dresser as though untouched. Hannah rubbed her eyes, unsettled. Maybe the cleaning staff had been in? No, that was ridiculous, she had locked the door herself, and the deadbolt was still drawn. Ethan yawned, sitting up. His hair stuck out at odd angles, his eyes puffy with sleep. "Morning," he muttered. "Ethan," Hannah said carefully, her voice tight. "Does this room look the same to you?" "Exactly the same?" He blinked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "It's a motel room. They don't exactly redecorate overnight." "No, I mean everything." She gestured around. "The bag, the bedspread, the remote, it's all in the same place." Ethan scratched his head, dismissive. "Maybe you just didn't notice before. You were half asleep when we got here." Hannah bit her lip, not wanting to push it, but the unease clung to her. She got up, padding toward the bathroom. The linoleum floor was cold, sticky against her skin. She flipped the switch, and the overhead light buzzed to life, flickering for several seconds before settling into a weak glow. The mirror above the sink was spotted and streaked, and her reflection looked pale, washed out. The strangest thing was the towels. She had unfolded one the night before to wipe her hands after washing up. Yet now both towels hung neatly folded, as if untouched. She leaned closer, heart hammering. Even the faint crease in the fabric from where it had been folded was identical. "Ethan," she called, her voice shaking slightly. "What?" His tone carried the irritation of someone who hadn't had coffee yet. "Come look at this." He joined her reluctantly, rubbing his eyes. She pointed at the towels, her hands trembling. "I used one. Last night. I swear I did. And now, look at them. Perfect. Like they were never touched." Ethan frowned, reaching out to touch the fabric. He shrugged. "Maybe the guy at the desk switched them while we were asleep. Maybe they've got some policy, I don't know." Hannah shook her head. The door was locked. They stood there for a long moment, staring at their reflections in the grimy mirror, two tired, uncertain faces looking back. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum in the walls. Finally, Ethan sighed, forcing a laugh. "We're overthinking this. We're tired. Let's just grab breakfast, get back on the road. Everything'll make sense once we're moving again." They dressed quickly, eager to leave the room behind. When Ethan pulled open the door, the morning light outside hit them with an intensity that felt wrong, too bright and too pale, washing the parking lot in a colorless glow. The air smelled faintly of ozone, sharp and unnatural. The office was just as dim and stale as the night before. The man behind the counter was already there, seated as though he had never left. His eyes snapped up the moment they walked in, and that same too-sharp glimmer passed through them. "Morning," Ethan said, trying to sound casual. "We're checking out." The man tilted his head slightly, as if the words confused him. "Checking out?" "Yeah. Room 7. We paid cash last night." The man's expression didn't change. He blinked slowly, his lips twitching in that almost smile again. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean. You just got here." Hannah froze. "What?" The man gestured toward the key rack on the wall. Every hook was full. Every tag hung neatly in place, untouched. Even the key to room 7. Her stomach dropped. She grabbed Ethan's arm, her voice trembling. We already stayed the night. We checked in. You gave us the key." The man's eyes lingered on her with a strange, hollow patience, as though he were waiting for her to correct herself. "I think you must be mistaken," he said softly. "Nobody's checked into room 7 in a very long time." Ethan's face paled, but he forced a laugh. "Okay, enough. Very funny. Can we just check out and get going?" The man's gaze sharpened, his voice dropping low. "Guests are always welcome, but nobody checks out until it's time." The words sank into the air like stones into water, rippling outward, heavy and final. Hannah felt the ground tilt beneath her feet, the room spinning, as though the walls themselves were listening. For the first time since they had arrived, she realized with chilling certainty, this was no ordinary motel. And they were not free to leave. Ethan slammed the door to the office harder than he meant to, his jaw tight as he stormed out into the pale morning light. Hannah followed, her chest heaving, every nerve in her body alive with dread. She could still feel the weight of the desk clerk's words in her ears, "Nobody checks out until it's time." It echoed, twisting itself into something larger, something heavier than just a strange comment. Ethan shoved his hands into his pockets, muttering curses under his breath, though whether they were aimed at the man inside or at the situation itself, Hannah couldn't tell. The parking lot looked almost eerily identical to the night before, cars lined up neatly in the same spaces, their paint dulled and weather-worn, each with a fine layer of dust as though they had been sitting for years. Hannah noticed something that made her stomach knot tighter. One of the cars, a dark green sedan near the far corner, had a crack in its windshield. She remembered that detail vividly because she had seen it last night when they pulled in. But the thing that chilled her now was that the same fresh droplets of rain streaked the cracked glass as if the storm had just ended, even though hours had passed, and the sky above was bone dry. "Ethan," she whispered, gripping his arm, "look at that car. It's exactly the same. The rain. Everything." He glanced at it, frowned, and then shook his head quickly. "Coincidence. Don't do this, Han. Don't spiral. The guy at the desk is a creep, sure, but that doesn't mean anything supernatural is happening. We'll just leave. Forget this place." His voice was firm, almost sharp, but Hannah could hear the thin crack of fear underneath it, the way someone sounds when they're trying to convince themselves more than anyone else. She didn't argue. Not yet. They climbed into their car. The inside smelled faintly of damp fabric and old takeout wrappers, a comfortingly normal scent compared to the motel's cloying mustiness. Ethan jammed the key into the ignition, and the engine roared to life without hesitation. For the first time since waking up, Hannah felt a flicker of relief. The world outside the motel still existed, she told herself. The open road was waiting. They pulled out of the parking lot, gravel crunching beneath the tires. The cracked neon sign buzzed faintly behind them, its half-lit letters struggling to spell out motel. Hannah kept her eyes fixed on the horizon as the two-lane road stretched ahead, framed by endless trees. The morning light was still strange, too pale, too flat, but the longer she stared, the more she tried to convince herself that maybe it was just the aftermath of last night's storm. Minutes passed. Then more. The trees blurred by, the road humming beneath the wheels in an endless rhythm. Yet the landscape didn't change. The same broken guardrail appeared again. The same leaning telephone pole with a nest jammed in its wires. Hannah's pulse quickened. She counted under her breath, 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, then there it was again. The same guardrail. The same nest. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. He didn't answer. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white. "Ethan," she repeated, louder this time. "I see it," he snapped, his voice tight and cracking. His eyes were locked straight ahead, his jaw clenched as though if he kept driving, if he just refused to acknowledge it, reality itself would eventually cave and correct. But it didn't. The road was a loop, folding back into itself in a cruel repetition. Every landmark repeated with perfect, suffocating precision. Hannah twisted in her seat, staring out the back window. In the distance, faint but growing closer with every second, the neon sign of the motel flickered against the gray daylight. "No," Hannah whispered, her throat dry. "No, no, no, this isn't possible." The car slowed as Ethan eased off the gas. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. "It's a trick. Has to be. Some kind of detour or," his words collapsed under their own weight. They rolled back into the gravel lot. The same spaces, the same dust-covered cars, the same cracked windshield with its impossible rain streaks. The motel loomed before them, unchanged, waiting like a predator that knew its prey could never escape. Hannah felt the crushing weight of inevitability settle over her shoulders. "I told you," Ethan muttered, his voice hollow, almost dazed. "We're overthinking this. We just took the wrong turn. That's all. We'll try again after breakfast." Hannah stared at him, horrified. His denial was sharp, almost desperate now, as though he thought refusing to believe would rewrite the truth. "Ethan, look at me. That wasn't a wrong turn. We drove straight. And we came back here. Don't you see? This place." "Stop," he barked, slamming his fist against the steering wheel so hard she flinched. The sound echoed in the enclosed space, sharp and violent. He leaned forward, his breath ragged, his forehead resting against his hands. "Just stop, Han. Please." "Not yet." The silence between them stretched long and brittle. Finally, Hannah reached out, her hand trembling as it hovered over his. "Ethan. I think we're trapped." The words seemed to fracture the air inside the car. Trapped. Saying it aloud made it real. Ethan lifted his head slowly, his eyes bloodshot, his face pale. For a fleeting second, she thought he might cry. Instead, he forced a laugh, thin, broken, bitter. "Then we'll break the rules," he said, pulling the car into park. "Nobody traps us." He pushed open the door and climbed out, his movements sharp and angry, as if defiance itself could punch a hole in the nightmare. Hannah followed, her legs weak, her heart a hammer in her chest. The motel stood silently before them, its rows of identical doors stretching out like teeth in a crooked smile. The flickering neon above hummed, the sound low and electric, like laughter buried in static. Hannah shivered, clutching her arms around herself. She didn't want to go back inside, but deep down, she knew there was nowhere else left to go. And for the first time, she wondered if the motel had known that all along. The lobby door creaked when Ethan pushed it open, the sound slicing through the thick, stagnant air. Hannah followed him reluctantly, her stomach tight with dread. The room was exactly as it had been before, the cracked vinyl chairs pushed against the wall, the dust-frosted lamp that hummed faintly as though filled with trapped flies, the warped linoleum curling in jagged edges where the glue had long since failed. But what drew her attention most was the clerk behind the counter, sitting perfectly still, as though he had been waiting for them all along. He didn't look up when they entered. His hands were folded neatly atop the desk, the skin mottled with strange discolorations that looked too precise to be age spots. Hannah stared at them a moment longer than she meant to and realized they almost resembled patterns, rows of dots, like marks burned into the flesh. The man's head lifted slowly, his pale eyes catching the dim light. His expression was unchanged from earlier, a kind of practiced neutrality, but Hannah swore there was something like amusement glinting behind his gaze. "Back so soon?" he asked, his voice smooth, unhurried, as if nothing they could do would surprise him. "I didn't hear you check out." Ethan bristled, stepping forward. "Don't play games with us. We left. We drove out of here. And yet somehow, we ended up back in this parking lot. What the hell is going on?" The clerk tilted his head slightly, as though considering the question. "What makes you so certain you ever left?" he said softly. The words landed like ice in Hannah's stomach. Ethan opened his mouth, fury burning in his expression, but Hannah grabbed his arm before he could lunge across the counter. The clerk hadn't moved an inch, hadn't even blinked. He looked utterly confident, like someone holding cards that could never be beaten. "We want to check out," Hannah said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Now." The clerk smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Everyone says that, at first. You'll find the rooms more accommodating once you've had time to settle." Ethan barked a bitter laugh. "Settle? Into what?" "Some kind of," he stopped, his breath catching, because a figure had appeared in the doorway that led to the back hall. It was a woman, dressed in the same dull uniform as the clerk, her gray hair pinned into a bun so tight it pulled at the corners of her face. She carried a set of folded towels, though they looked stained, more gray than white. Without acknowledging the couple, she moved behind the desk, set the towels on a shelf, and turned to the clerk. Her lips moved, whispering something too faint for Hannah to catch. But Ethan must have caught it, because he swore under his breath. "What did she say?" Hannah hissed. He shook his head. "Something about new arrivals." The woman finally turned her head toward them. Her eyes were darker than the clerk's, almost black, with an uncanny stillness that made Hannah feel like she was being studied by something not entirely human. For a long, unbearable moment, the woman stared directly at Hannah. Then, with a small, polite nod, she slipped back into the hallway without a sound, vanishing as though she had never been there at all. Hannah realized she was clutching Ethan's hand so tightly her knuckles ached. "We're not staying here," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We can't." "Of course you're staying," the clerk interrupted, his tone firm now, the practiced calm falling away. His voice carried a weight that pressed down on them, an authority that felt impossible to argue with. "You've already checked in. The room is yours. The room will always be yours." Ethan slammed his hand on the counter, the sound sharp and violent. "No, damn it. We didn't agree to this." You can't just... Can't? The clerk's head tilted again, his pale eyes narrowing. Oh, you'll find there are very few things we can't do here. And fewer still that you can. The air in the lobby grew heavier, thicker, as if the walls themselves leaned closer. Hannah felt sweat prickling along the back of her neck despite the stale chill of the room. She wanted to scream, to drag Ethan out by force, but her body felt rooted to the spot, caught by the weight of the clerk's gaze. And then, without warning, the bell on the counter chimed. Neither of them had touched it. The sharp metallic ring sliced through the silence, bouncing off the walls like a signal. Somewhere down the hall, a door creaked open. Hannah spun toward the sound, but the corridor stretched into shadow, impossibly long, far longer than it had looked from the outside. Figures shifted in the dark, shapes that suggested other staff, or perhaps other guests. She couldn't be sure. When she turned back, the clerk was smiling. "Your room is ready," he said, his voice soft and mocking. "It always is." Ethan's face twisted with rage, but Hannah yanked on his arm, pulling him toward the exit. She couldn't take the weight of those eyes on her, couldn't take the subtle amusement that seemed to whisper, "We own you already." They burst back into the daylight, the motel stretching out before them with its endless rows of doors. The neon sign buzzed behind them like laughter. Ethan stood rigid, fists clenched, breathing hard. "They know," he whispered, his voice low and raw. "They know we can't leave." Hannah swallowed hard, staring at the pale curtains fluttering behind the windows of the empty rooms. For the first time since arriving, she felt something colder than fear creep in, acceptance. The staff weren't confused. They weren't mistaken. They had been waiting for them. And if that was true, then the motel hadn't just trapped them. It had chosen them. The night pressed itself against the windows of room 6 like a living thing, thick and suffocating, swallowing the glow of the single lamp on the nightstand. Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, her legs trembling as she hugged herself, staring at the thin curtains that fluttered even though the window was closed tight. Ethan paced the room, muttering under his breath, running his hands through his hair until it stuck up in jagged tufts. They hadn't spoken much since storming out of the lobby. The weight of the clerk's smile, the bell's unnatural chime, had silenced them both. At first, Hannah thought the low sounds she heard were part of the building itself, pipes groaning in the walls, the shiver of wind through broken seals, maybe even an old television left on in another room. But as the minutes stretched into hours, she realized they weren't mechanical sounds at all. They were voices. Faint, muffled, whispering as though carried through long, winding corridors. She pressed her ear to the wall. The voices weren't speaking clearly, more like fragments, half-syllables, a stream of broken words. Yet the cadence felt deliberate, like sentences caught just beyond understanding. Ethan stopped pacing when he saw her listening. "What is it?" "Shoo," she hissed. "Do you hear it?" For a moment, he stood frozen, his expression hard. Then, reluctantly, he pressed his head to the wall too. His body went rigid almost instantly. "Jesus," he muttered. "There are people in the next room." Hannah shook her head. "No. It doesn't sound normal. It's not like a conversation. She swallowed hard, struggling for the right word. "It's like they're reciting something." The whispers rose and fell like a chant, broken, warped, but carrying a rhythm that crawled beneath her skin. Suddenly, a laugh burst out from somewhere in the hall. A sharp, ugly laugh, wet and gurgling, as if the person couldn't quite breathe while making the sound. Hannah jumped back from the wall, her heart slamming into her ribs. Ethan was already moving toward the door, his anger and fear mixing into reckless bravado. "Don't!" Hannah hissed, grabbing his arm. "Don't open it!" But Ethan's jaw was set, his face flushed with fury. "I'm not letting them screw with us." He wrenched the door open. The hallway stretched out before them, dim and endless, lit only by a series of flickering bulbs that buzzed like dying insects. At first glance, it looked empty. But then Hannah saw movement at the far end, a figure in a gray suit, standing perfectly still with its back to them. It was turned toward one of the doors, its hand hovering inches from the knob, frozen as though caught mid-motion. Ethan took a step forward, but the floor creaked loudly under his shoe. The figure's head turned, not all at once but in a slow, jerking motion, as if bones cracked with every inch it twisted. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. Its face was wrong. Too long, too pale, with eyes that glowed faintly in the half-dark. The figure didn't move closer. Instead, it opened its mouth wide, impossibly wide, and a sound spilled out, not a scream, not a laugh, but a strange, hollow voice that echoed down the hall like dozens of people speaking at once. The same chant they had heard through the wall, only louder now, sharper, as if it had been waiting to be released. Ethan stumbled back into the room, slamming the door shut. Hannah pressed against it, as though her weight could keep the sound from seeping in. But the chant continued, muffled once again, coming from all directions, the walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath them. Ethan grabbed the lamp from the nightstand and yanked it out of the wall, holding it like a weapon. "If anyone comes in here, I swear to God." But Hannah barely heard him. She was staring at the thin line of light under the door. Shadows were moving there. Not just one or two but dozens, flickering and stretching like a crowd gathered just outside. Their shapes were warped, some too tall, some bent unnaturally low, some shifting in ways no body should. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "They're not people, Ethan." The shadows lingered for long, agonizing minutes, the chanting rising and falling, until, just as suddenly, it stopped. The hallway fell silent. The air in the room lightened, as if a pressure had lifted. Hannah collapsed onto the bed, her chest heaving. Ethan paced again, the lamp still clutched in his hand. "Guests," he muttered. "Other guests. That's what they are. They're just trying to scare us." But Hannah wasn't convinced. The look in that figure's eyes, the way its voice had fractured into hundreds, didn't feel like a prank. It felt older. Hungrier. She thought about the woman with the towels, the way she'd whispered about new arrivals. Maybe the other guests weren't guests at all. Maybe they were something else entirely, remnants, echoes, things caught here long before Hannah and Ethan ever arrived. She didn't sleep that night. Every time her eyes closed, she saw the pale face in the hall, its mouth yawning wide as if ready to swallow her whole. When dawn finally crept into the sky, weak and gray, Hannah forced herself to look out the window. And her blood turned cold. The motel lot was filled. Every space now held a car, each one dusty, weather-worn, abandoned. Some had flat tires, others missing doors, and one so old it looked like it hadn't been driven in decades. And yet, as she scanned them, she could swear she saw figures sitting inside. Still. Waiting. She jerked back from the window, clutching her chest. Ethan noticed her panic, but before he could ask, the phone on the nightstand rang. Neither of them moved at first. The sharp, mechanical ringing sounded alien in the silence, slicing into the room like a blade. On the third ring, Ethan snatched it up. "Hello?" A pause. Then a voice answered, calm and cheerful, with the faintest trace of static. "Breakfast is served." The line went dead. The phone's click still echoed in Ethan's head as he set it back into its cradle, his hand trembling despite his attempt to look composed. Hannah sat rigidly on the bed, her eyes wide and glassy, as if she hadn't blinked in minutes. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The words, "breakfast is served," hung in the air, light and casual, yet somehow more terrifying than all the chanting and shadows from the night before. Finally, Ethan said, "We're not eating anything here." His voice was firm, almost defiant, but Hannah noticed his lips were dry and cracked, his throat bobbing as though thirst burned inside him. They hadn't eaten since yesterday. Her own stomach twisted painfully, but the thought of stepping out into the hall again made bile rise in her throat. The silence was broken by a soft thud against the wall. Then another. A steady, rhythmic sound, like footsteps pacing just beyond the plaster. Hannah stared at the wallpaper, its faded floral pattern rippling slightly as though something pressed against it from the other side. She couldn't take it anymore. "We can't stay in here," she whispered. "We can't just wait for them." Ethan turned to her, exhaustion dragging his features into something harsher. "Where do you want to go? Every time we try to leave, we end up back here." "Not outside," she said, her voice low. "Inside. The halls. There has to be more to this place than we've seen." He frowned, but after a moment, he nodded. The idea of sitting in that room, waiting for another knock or another phone call, was unbearable. They opened the door cautiously. The hallway stretched before them, long and dim, the ceiling lights flickering in and out of sync like a heartbeat. Hannah clutched Ethan's arm, her breath shallow. The air smelled different out here, less musty, more metallic, like rust or blood. They started walking, their footsteps unnaturally loud against the threadbare carpet. The doors lined up on either side, each identical, each numbered in peeling brass. Hannah noticed the numbers weren't in order. 7 came after 5, then 12, then 9, as if someone had rearranged them without caring for sequence. Ethan reached out to one of the doors and tried the knob. It turned, but the door wouldn't open. He tried another, then another. Locked. Every one. Their numbers gleamed faintly, mocking them with their uniformity. "Maybe our key," Hannah suggested, pulling the small brass key from her pocket. "Room 6. It felt heavier than it should, colder than metal had any right to be. She slid it into the next door's lock. To her surprise, it clicked. They exchanged a tense glance before pushing it open. The room inside wasn't like theirs. It was larger, stretching impossibly deep, with dozens of beds lined up in rows, each covered in a thin sheet. Hannah's heart hammered as she realized the sheets weren't flat. They rose and fell in subtle shapes, the unmistakable contours of bodies beneath them. Ethan whispered, "Don't." But Hannah was already stepping inside. The air was freezing, sharp enough to sting her lungs. She reached the nearest bed and slowly, with trembling fingers, lifted the sheet. Nothing. The mattress was empty, bare. She let out a shaky breath, almost laughing with relief. But when she glanced back at the row, she froze. The other beds were uncovered now, their sheets folded neatly at the foot. The shapes beneath them were visible. Dozens of bodies. Pale. Still. Their faces hidden in shadow. "Han," Ethan's voice cracked. "We're leaving." She stumbled back toward him, and together they pulled the door shut. Hannah pressed her forehead to the wood, breathing hard, fighting the urge to sob. Ethan's hand gripped her shoulder. "We don't open any more doors." But the motel seemed to have other plans. As they turned to retreat, they realized the hallway wasn't the same. It stretched longer now, far longer than before, the ceiling higher, the lights dimmer. New doors had appeared, unmarked, some ajar, others wide open, revealing slivers of darkness inside. The air carried a low hum, like distant electricity or a swarm of insects. They walked faster, but the hall seemed endless. The carpet's pattern repeated too perfectly, looping like the road outside. Hannah's legs ached, her breath ragged. "We're not getting anywhere," she whispered. Ethan stopped abruptly. She almost ran into him before realizing why he'd frozen. Ahead, one of the open doors revealed something impossible, a window, glowing with daylight. Not just any daylight, warm, golden, real daylight, so bright it made Hannah's chest ache with longing. She ran before she could stop herself. Ethan shouted after her, but she didn't listen. She pushed into the room, the golden light flooding her vision. A window, wide and clean, overlooked a stretch of open road cutting through rolling hills. Freedom. She grabbed the latch, tugged it open, and leaned out. Her scream tore through the silence. The road outside wasn't a road at all. It was painted on a wall. A mural, faded and peeling, sunlight nothing more than a reflection from an unseen bulb. She staggered back, choking on her breath. Ethan caught her, pulling her away from the window, his own face twisted in horror. The motel was mocking them. They stumbled back into the hall, doors stretching endlessly in either direction, each one promising another cruel trick. Hannah clutched the brass key in her fist until it dug into her palm, drawing blood. It was their only anchor, their only reminder of what was real. But as she stared at the endless corridor, she realized the truth gnawing at her: the motel wasn't a building. It was a maze. A trap. A living thing. And it was changing around them. The key was still clenched in Hannah's palm when she opened her eyes. For a fleeting second, before the world sharpened around her, she thought she was outside, that maybe the light in her dream was real, maybe they had made it out. But then the weight of the air pressed down, thick and stale, and she knew before she even moved her head where she was. Room 6. Her heart lurched. The same faded wallpaper. The same sagging nightstand with its single bulb humming faintly. The same scratch on the dresser she'd noticed the first night. She bolted upright, panic flooding through her. Ethan stirred beside her. He was lying on the bed, still in his clothes from yesterday, though they looked strangely cleaner, pressed flat as if they had never been worn. He blinked, groggy, and then his eyes widened as he took in their surroundings. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no, no." He tore the blanket off, his breathing ragged. "We were in the hall. You remember that, right? The doors. The window. That wasn't a dream." "It wasn't," Hannah said quickly, her throat dry. She opened her hand, expecting to find the brass key, her proof that it had all happened. But her palm was empty. Not just empty, smooth. The small cut she'd made holding it too tightly was gone, the skin flawless. Her chest tightened. "Ethan, it's gone." He stood in the middle of the room, pacing, muttering to himself. "We lost hours. Days, maybe. I don't know how long." And now, he stopped, turning toward her with wild eyes. "It reset us. Don't you see? That's what this is. Every time we fight it, every time we push too hard, it just rewinds. Puts us back where we started." Hannah shook her head violently. "That doesn't make sense. This isn't a game. It can't just decide." A sharp knock cut her off. They froze. The knock came again, 3 sharp raps, perfectly even. Hannah's eyes darted to the door, her stomach twisting. Slowly, the knob turned. Ethan grabbed the lamp from the nightstand, holding it like a club. But the door didn't open. Instead, a slip of paper slid under the frame, crisp and white against the worn carpet. The knob stopped turning. The hall outside went silent again. Hannah stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. Finally, with trembling fingers, she reached for it. It was a note, written in blocky, precise handwriting. "Breakfast. 8 a.m. Her hands shook. What does this mean? Why do they keep saying that? Ethan snatched it from her, crumpling it in his fist. "I don't care. We're not playing their game." But Hannah wasn't so sure anymore. The motel was forcing them into patterns, sleep, reset, instructions. If they resisted, what would happen? The clock on the nightstand ticked faintly, though she hadn't remembered hearing it before. Its hands pointed to 7:58. Ethan's face drained of color. He dropped the crumpled paper as if it had burned him. "That clock wasn't here yesterday," he muttered. They both watched as the second hand clicked forward. 7:59. The air in the room grew heavier, thicker. Hannah's ears rang with the pressure of it. She clutched Ethan's sleeve, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. 8 o'clock. The clock chimed once. The sound was low and distorted, like a church bell ringing underwater. And the door swung open. A cart stood in the hall. Silver trays gleamed under domed lids. The smell of food wafted into the room: eggs, bacon, toast. It should have been comforting, but the aroma was too strong, metallic beneath the grease, almost like blood. Hannah covered her mouth, bile rising. Ethan shoved the cart away violently, sending it rolling down the hall. Plates clattered, silverware rattled, but the cart didn't stop. It kept rolling until the shadows swallowed it whole, the sound fading into silence. The door slammed shut on its own. The clock ticked again. 8:01. Hannah collapsed onto the bed, shaking. Ethan, it knows what time it is. It knows where we are. It's controlling all of this. Ethan dropped the lamp, his shoulders slumping. Then maybe we play along. His voice was hollow, defeated. Maybe if we follow the rules, it'll let us out. She stared at him, horrified. You can't mean that. What if playing along is exactly what it wants? He didn't answer. The rest of the day passed in a blur of unease. They didn't try to leave, didn't try to open doors. Hannah sat by the window, staring at the parking lot. More cars had appeared. She didn't recognize their makes or models, some looked decades old, others like they had been totaled in accidents, yet they sat in pristine rows, each one with windows too dark to see through. By nightfall, exhaustion dragged her under. She tried to fight it, terrified of what would come when she woke again, but sleep claimed her all the same. And when her eyes opened next, the clock read 7:58. The note was back on the floor. Ethan was in the bed beside her, his clothes once again pristine, his face pale and hollow. And the door stood waiting for 8 o'clock. The smell of coffee hit them before they even opened the door. Not the faint, burnt tang of Motel brewed sludge, but a rich, heady aroma that belonged in a cafe. Hannah sat on the bed, frozen, staring at the slip of paper on the carpet. It was the same as yesterday, 2 words in that same blocky handwriting. Breakfast. 8 a.m. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. The clock on the nightstand read 7:59. She didn't have to say anything. Ethan already knew. He stood at the door, fists clenched, jaw locked, watching the knob like it might strike at him. The clock ticked. 8 o'clock. The door creaked open. This time there was no cart. Instead, 2 figures stood in the hall, side by side. Hannah's stomach dropped. She recognized them instantly, the receptionist from the first night, pale and stiff in her pressed blazer, and the thin man who had brought them towels. Both were smiling. But something was wrong with their faces. The receptionist's smile was too wide, stretching further than it should, her lips pulled taut like the skin might tear. The thin man's grin was rigid, frozen, his teeth small and perfectly square like porcelain. Their eyes didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even acknowledge Hannah or Ethan as people. They just stood there, side by side, blocking the doorway. "Good morning," the receptionist said. Her voice was cheerful, sing-song, but the tone was off, like a recording playing back through warped tape. "Breakfast is served in the dining room," the thin man added, his grin never wavering. His voice was a little too deep, a little too slow, like someone speaking underwater. Hannah gripped Ethan's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "Don't," she whispered. But Ethan stepped forward anyway, his face hard. "What do you want from us?" His voice cracked, a sharp edge of desperation breaking through his anger. "Why are you doing this?" The receptionist tilted her head. For a moment, her smile flickered, just for a fraction of a second, before snapping back into place. "Your stay is not yet complete," she said softly. Ethan's jaw worked. "Then when is it complete? How do we leave?" The thin man's porcelain grin widened, impossibly, splitting the corners of his cheeks until faint lines of red appeared. He leaned forward, too close, his breath reeking faintly of copper. "Guests don't leave," he whispered. "Guests finish." And then, without another word, they turned in unison and began walking down the hall. Hannah wanted to slam the door, to hide, to pretend none of it was happening. But something inside her, maybe curiosity, maybe dread, pulled her forward. Ethan glanced back at her, his face pale and tight, and she knew he felt it too. They followed. The hall stretched longer than it had before, the carpet's faded pattern twisting and bending like it was alive. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, some flickering, others glowing too bright. Doors lined the walls, each numbered, each identical, yet when Hannah glanced at one, just for a moment, she thought she saw her own reflection in its brass numbers, staring back at her with hollow eyes. Finally, the hall opened into a dining room. It was spotless. Crisp white tablecloths, gleaming silverware, a buffet steaming with food. Platters of bacon and eggs, stacks of golden pancakes, bowls of fruits so vibrant they looked painted. Everything smelled rich, intoxicating, mouth-watering. But the room was empty. Not another guest in sight. The receptionist gestured toward the tables with a too-wide sweep of her arm. "Breakfast is served." Neither Hannah nor Ethan moved. The thin man tilted his head, that porcelain grin still splitting his face. "Eat," he said. Hannah's stomach churned. The food smelled so good, too good. Her body ached with hunger, but every instinct screamed, "Don't touch it." She grabbed Ethan's hand, shaking her head. "No," Ethan said firmly. "We're not playing along." The receptionist blinked. Slowly. Too slowly. "Guests must eat," she said. Ethan's grip tightened on Hannah's hand. He turned, pulling her back toward the hall. The second they reached the doorway, the air shifted. A cold rush swept over them like a wind tunnel. Hannah's ears popped. The walls seemed to stretch higher, the light dimming until only the dining room behind them was lit. The receptionist and the thin man stood motionless in the glow, their faces still frozen in those impossible smiles. But their eyes followed Ethan and Hannah now, locked onto them with inhuman precision. And then, together, they spoke. Not in English, not in any language Hannah recognized, but in a chorus of guttural, overlapping sounds. The noise scraped at her skull, making her vision blur. She stumbled, clutching her ears. Ethan dragged her forward, and they ran, sprinting down the endless hallway, the guttural chant chasing them like a physical force. The walls pulsed with it, the floor vibrating under their feet. Hannah screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the sound. They reached room 6. The door swung open on its own. Inside, everything was as it had been, bed neatly made, lamp humming, clock ticking. Ethan slammed the door and pressed his back against it, panting. Hannah collapsed onto the bed, tears streaking down her face. The sound outside stopped. The silence was worse. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just sat there, listening, waiting, bracing for whatever came next. And then the clock ticked again. 7:58. The slip of paper appeared under the door. Breakfast. 8 a.m. Ethan picked it up with shaking hands. He laughed then, a hollow, broken sound. "We're not escaping," he whispered. "We're just resetting." Over and over. Until, his voice cracked. He looked at Hannah, his eyes wide, terrified, but also full of something else, something like resignation. "Until what?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. He held up the note. His smile, nothing like theirs, but just as hopeless, spread across his face. "Until we finish." The note sat on the nightstand like an accusation. Hannah couldn't take her eyes off it. Same paper. Same blocky handwriting. Same demand. Breakfast. 8 a.m. She felt like if she stared hard enough, if she burned the words into her mind, she might find a crack in the pattern, a hidden message, something that proved they weren't just being toyed with. But the longer she looked, the more it seemed to mock her. Ethan was pacing again, back and forth, muttering half-formed curses under his breath. His hair stuck up in wild tufts, his shirt clinging to him with sweat. He hadn't slept. Hannah wasn't sure if she had either. Time inside the room was slippery, every second dragging and racing all at once. At 7:59, Ethan stopped pacing. His eyes darted to the clock, then to the door. His lips twisted into a grim smile. "Not this time," he whispered. Hannah's stomach dropped. "Ethan." He held up his hand to silence her, then crouched in front of the nightstand, feeling around the lamp cord. With one sharp tug, he ripped the plug from the wall. Sparks flickered. The hum of the bulb died. The clock's hands froze on 7:59. For a moment, silence swallowed the room. No ticking. No hum. Nothing. Then, faintly, a sound like distant footsteps echoed through the walls. Slow. Deliberate. Coming closer. Hannah's skin crawled. You broke it, she hissed. What if that's worse? What if? The footsteps stopped. The floor beneath them vibrated faintly, like something heavy shifting below. The air grew damp, moldy, carrying the sharp stench of mildew. Hannah gagged. Ethan pressed his ear to the carpet, listening. It's underneath us, he whispered. Her heart skipped. What is? The way out. Before she could stop him, he yanked the dresser away from the wall. It screeched across the floor, revealing a small, square outline in the carpet, a trapdoor. Hannah's blood ran cold. It hadn't been there before. Ethan's hands shook as he pulled up the latch. The smell intensified instantly, a rotting dampness that clawed at the back of Hannah's throat. A narrow staircase yawned below, swallowed in pitch darkness. Hannah shook her head violently. No. Ethan, no. We don't go down there. We can't. We can't stay here either, he snapped. His eyes blazed with manic determination. Every time we follow their rules, we end up right back here. Reset. Do you want that? Over and over, forever? She didn't answer. Because the truth was clawing at her, too. Maybe he was right. Maybe the only way forward was down. Ethan swung his legs into the opening, the wooden steps creaking under his weight. The air that drifted up was damp and cold, like the exhale of a crypt. He reached back for her hand. Come with me, he said softly. Don't let me go alone. Tears stung Hannah's eyes, but she nodded. She couldn't let him disappear into that blackness without her. The stairs groaned with each step as they descended. The darkness pressed around them like a living thing, swallowing their shapes. Hannah's hands skimmed the wall for balance, her fingers brushing slimy brick. The deeper they went, the stronger the smell grew, mold and rot and something else beneath it, something metallic, like dried blood. At the bottom, their feet sank into damp earth. Ethan clicked on his lighter, the tiny flame casting a trembling circle of light. The basement stretched into the dark, walls of rough stone slick with moisture. The ceiling dripped steadily, each drop echoing in the silence. Hannah hugged herself, shivering. What is this place? Ethan didn't answer. He was staring at something ahead, his face pale in the flickering light. She followed his gaze. Shapes lined the walls. At first she thought they were statues, but the closer they came, the more details she saw. The skin. The hair. The fingernails. Bodies. Dozens of them. They stood upright, pressed against the stone like flies caught in amber. Their eyes were closed, their mouths sealed shut, but their skin looked fresh, their clothes unstained by time. Hannah's stomach lurched violently. She stumbled back, gagging. They're alive, Ethan whispered hoarsely. They have to be. As if in response, one of the figures twitched. Its eyelids fluttered. Its head shifted an inch, then froze again, as if locked in invisible restraints. Hannah clamped her hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. And then, faintly, she heard it. A whisper, curling through the damp air, coming from all around them at once. Finish your stay. The lighter flickered. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, dozens of voices speaking the same words in eerie unison. Ethan whipped the flame in every direction, but there was no one there, only the rows of bodies, their sealed mouths never moving. Hannah grabbed his arm. We need to go. Now. Ethan, please. But he wasn't listening. He had stepped toward the wall, his face slack with horror and awe. He reached out, trembling, toward one of the figures, a young woman with long hair matted to her face. The moment his fingers brushed her skin, her eyes snapped open. They were white. Completely white. Her mouth tore open, lips splitting at the corners, and a scream erupted from her throat, a shrill, inhuman sound that shook the walls. The other bodies jolted awake, their eyes snapping open one by one, their mouths ripping into gaping, bloody smiles. The whispers became screams, deafening, the sound pressing into Hannah's skull until she thought it would burst. She yanked Ethan back, dragging him toward the stairs. The lighter went out. They scrambled in darkness, hands slipping on wet stone, the screams echoing behind them. Hannah's breath tore from her lungs in ragged sobs. She didn't know if Ethan was still with her, she just ran, clawing her way up the stairs. And then, with a lurch, she burst into the motel room again. The trapdoor was gone. The dresser stood neatly against the wall, the carpet unbroken. The lamp hummed. The clock ticked. 7:58. The slip of paper lay on the floor. Breakfast. 8 a.m. Hannah collapsed, sobbing. Ethan stood frozen, staring at the note, his face blank, drained of all expression. And then, slowly, he began to smile. Hannah didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the screams again, the ripping mouths, the shrill chorus echoing from the basement walls. But Ethan had changed. He lay in bed with his back to her, his body utterly still, like a mannequin placed beneath the sheets. His breathing was even, calm, but there was something unnatural in the way he never shifted, never sighed, never murmured in sleep like he always used to. By morning, the paper appeared again. Breakfast. 8 a.m. The clock ticked its way toward the inevitable. Hannah didn't even look at it this time. She sat on the edge of the bed, knees pulled tight to her chest, staring at the door as though her sheer hatred might set it aflame. Ethan rose without a word. He didn't complain, didn't resist. He simply stood, straightened his shirt as though preparing for a meeting, and walked to the door. He bent, picked up the paper, studied it briefly, then folded it neatly and slid it into his pocket. Hannah felt a chill ripple through her. "Ethan, what are you doing?" He turned to her. His expression was flat, unreadable, but the corners of his mouth twitched as though something inside him was fighting to grin. "We've been doing this wrong," he said quietly. "Running, panicking, resisting. That's why it resets us. Maybe we're supposed to see something. Maybe the rooms are trying to tell us the truth." Her stomach nodded. "What rooms?" "The ones we never open." Before she could stop him, he yanked the door wide and stepped into the hallway. Hannah scrambled to follow, her bare feet slapping the carpet. The corridor stretched longer than it ever had, lined with doors that seemed to hum faintly with energy. Brass numbers gleamed on each one, 1, 2, 3, 4. Ethan stopped in front of room 7. He rested his hand on the knob, his fingers twitching. Hannah's pulse thundered in her throat. "Ethan, please, don't." But he had already turned it. The door swung open, revealing a room nearly identical to theirs, same faded wallpaper, same worn carpet. But the bed was different. The bed held two shapes beneath the blanket. Hannah froze. They were looking at themselves. Hannah and Ethan, perfect copies, lay sleeping side by side, their chests rising and falling in unison. The Hannah on the bed twitched faintly, murmuring something inaudible, while the Ethan shifted, rolling closer to her. Their faces were peaceful. Content. As if they were in a different world entirely. Hannah's heart lurched into her throat. "Close it," she whispered harshly. "Ethan, close it now." But he stepped inside. The air in the room shifted immediately, thicker, heavier, like stepping underwater. The sleeping Hannah stirred, her eyelids fluttering. For one terrible second, she opened her eyes, and stared directly at the real Hannah. Her lips curled into a smile. The real Hannah screamed and yanked Ethan backward. The door slammed shut with a violent crack that rattled the frames. They stumbled into the hall, gasping for breath. Ethan's face was pale but his eyes burned with feverish light. "Don't you see?" he panted. "They're us. Different versions. Trapped, just like we are. That's why the motel resets, we're looping through ourselves." Hannah shook her head, clutching her temples. "No, no, 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 no. This isn't us. It's showing us lies, trying to break us." But Ethan wasn't listening. He staggered to the next door, room 8, and threw it open. This time the room was dark, lit only by the flicker of an old television. Static hissed from the screen. A figure sat on the bed, hunched forward, staring at the noise. It was Ethan. Alone. His face gaunt, eyes sunken, his body thin and wasted. His lips moved as though whispering to the static, but no sound came out. His skin sagged in loose folds, as if time had devoured him. The static flared. For a moment, the withered Ethan turned his head, his eyes glowing white in the dim light. His lips stretched into a grotesque grin. Hannah yanked the door shut, her body shaking violently. "Stop it," she sobbed. "Stop opening them. Please." But Ethan was trembling with something between terror and exhilaration. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Don't you get it, Hannah? These are our choices. Our futures. Every time we wake up, every time it resets, we're being shown what we could be. What we will be." He staggered down the hall, dragging her behind him despite her protests. Room 9. He shoved it open. The stench of rot burst out instantly. Hannah gagged, choking on bile. Inside, the room was filled wall to wall with black mold. The bed sagged under the weight of decay. On it lay Hannah, her own face gray, her body bloated, her skin split in dark patches of infection. Flies buzzed around the carcass, their tiny wings catching the light. The dead Hannah's eyes opened. They were full of maggots. The door slammed itself shut with a thunderous bang. Hannah collapsed against the wall, shaking uncontrollably, her tears blurring her vision. "No more," she pleaded. "Ethan, no more." But he wasn't hearing her anymore. His eyes were wide, glassy, his lips twitching with a half-formed smile that looked too much like the staff's. He moved to room 10, his hand trembling on the knob, his breathing fast and shallow. "Ethan," she begged, grabbing his arm. "Please. If we keep opening them, we'll never get out. Don't you see what it's doing? It wants us to break. It wants us to lose ourselves." For the first time, he looked at her. Really looked at her. His face softened, if only for a second, and she thought maybe, just maybe, he was coming back to her. Then the doorknob clicked. The door swung wide. And what they saw inside made both of them go cold. It was their own motel room. Room 6. Identical down to the smallest detail. The lamp hummed. The clock ticked. The note lay on the floor. But inside, they saw themselves again, Hannah and Ethan, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the door, looking terrified. Looking at them. The doubles moved in perfect sync, their lips parting at the same time. Their voices came out in unison, flat and hollow, filling the corridor. "Your stay is not yet complete." And then the doubles smiled. The hallway shook. Not violently, not like an earthquake, but with a sickening, rolling pulse, as though the motel itself had inhaled. The carpet rippled beneath Hannah's feet. The lights along the ceiling flickered in a rhythm, not random but deliberate, like the slow blink of a giant eye. For a moment, she thought she heard a heartbeat, the thump of something impossibly vast echoing behind the walls. The doubles in the room, her and Ethan, sitting on the bed, staring out, didn't move except to smile. Their grins were wide, fixed, unnatural, stretching too far across their faces. But their eyes burned with clarity, like they knew something Hannah and Ethan didn't. The longer Hannah looked at them, the more she felt the floor sway under her, as though her stomach were being tugged toward that room, toward them. "Close it," Hannah whispered. Her voice was barely audible, her throat dry, but Ethan didn't move. His jaw was clenched, his shoulders trembling. She could see it, his desperate need to understand, to solve this. That curiosity that had always driven him, the thing she loved about him on the outside, had become poison here. He needed answers, even if it meant feeding himself to the darkness. "Ethan," she pleaded, clutching his sleeve. "Please, listen to me. This isn't showing us choices anymore, it's showing us traps. The more we look, the more it takes. Don't you feel it?" But Ethan shook his head slowly. "No. No, this is it. This is the end. If we can figure this one out, maybe," his eyes locked on the doubles again. "Maybe we'll know how to leave." The doubles leaned forward. Not much, just a fraction of an inch, but Hannah felt her entire chest seize with panic. Their voices came again, overlapping perfectly, like two recordings layered on top of each other. You cannot leave what you are. The hallway snapped like glass under pressure. For an instant, Hannah thought the walls had cracked. But instead, they split. A jagged seam tore open down the length of the corridor, revealing not wood, not wiring, but another hallway. And inside that hallway was another Hannah. Another Ethan. Another line of endless rooms. The doubles stared. The scene yawned wider. And suddenly, Hannah was surrounded. Dozens of them, hundreds, Hannah's and Ethan's spilled into the corridor, flickering in and out like reflections in shattered mirrors. Some were identical to them, faces twisted in terror. Others were older, worn, hollow-eyed, their expressions empty. Some weren't even human anymore, shapes stretched long and thin, jaws unhinged, limbs bent at angles that no body should hold. They crowded the walls, the ceilings, the carpet beneath her feet, all whispering in fragments that echoed like overlapping prayers. You never left. We are all here. It does not end. It never ends. Hannah dropped to her knees, clutching her head, the voices stabbing at her skull. The sound was unbearable, her own voice, Ethan's voice, a chorus of them repeating forever, piling higher and higher until her ears rang with static. She screamed, but the scream only joined the others, another thread in the sickening fabric of noise. Ethan stumbled forward into the storm of selves, his eyes glassy. I see it now, he whispered, his tone eerily calm despite the chaos. We're not guests. We're the foundation. The motel is built on us. Hannah grabbed his wrist desperately. No. That's not true. Don't listen to them. But his face twisted into something between awe and surrender. Every version, every room, it's us. It's always been us. We don't check out because we were never meant to. We are the motel, Hannah. The doubles closest to them smiled wider, their mouths splitting at the corners, blood seeping down their cheeks. Their teeth were long, uneven, jutting from gums that weren't quite flesh anymore. They reached for him, dozens of hands, dozens of Ethan's hands, each pulling him deeper toward the open door, toward the endless reflection of themselves. Hannah clawed at his arm, sobbing. Ethan, fight it. Please. If you let them take you, you won't come back. But he didn't resist. His body sagged into their grip. His eyes turned toward hers one last time, soft and mournful, almost apologetic. And then he was gone. The door slammed shut. The corridor fell silent. Hannah froze, gasping, her chest heaving as though her lungs were being crushed. The silence wasn't comforting. It was heavier than the noise, pressing in on her skull, suffocating. She staggered to her feet, staring at the door that had swallowed him. For a moment, she considered opening it, following him into whatever hell waited beyond. But the thought alone filled her with nausea. She had seen what those rooms did. She wouldn't survive another one. She turned, but the seam in the wall was still there, jagged and raw, showing infinite hallways, infinite rooms, each containing a reflection of her. They were all watching now. Every Hannah in every hallway stared at her with eyes that ranged from terrified to empty to monstrous. She felt their gaze burn into her skin, like heat lamps frying her alive. One of them spoke. Not in whispers this time, but in a clear, booming voice that rattled the walls. You are the last one left. Her stomach dropped. Her knees buckled. She pressed her back against the wall, shaking her head violently. No. No, no, no. Ethan's coming back. He has to come back. But even as she said it, she knew the truth. He wasn't. The silence deepened. The walls shifted, their seams widening like wounds. The carpet bubbled and rotted under her feet. The air grew thick, humid, reeking of mold and old blood. The motel was collapsing, not falling apart, but folding in on itself, pulling all its realities tighter, crushing them into a singular point. And Hannah realized, with horror so sharp it felt like her bones would splinter under it, that the motel wasn't collapsing around her. It was collapsing into her. Hannah staggered down the corridor, her hands pressed to her temples as if she could hold her mind together by sheer force. The walls were alive now, pulsing in and out like lungs, the wallpaper peeling away in strips that writhed like snakes. Doors slammed open and shut around her, each revealing flashes of impossible scenes, herself screaming, herself laughing, herself lying dead on the floor in pools of blood that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Her breath came in ragged gasps, every inhale sharp, every exhale torn from her chest as though the motel itself were feeding on her oxygen. She tried to call Ethan's name, but the sound of her voice stretched unnaturally, echoing down the hallways until it didn't even sound like her anymore. It sounded like them, like the other Hannahs, whispering in unison, 1,000 variations of her voice asking the same question. Why do you fight? Her knees buckled, but she forced herself onward, clutching the walls to keep from collapsing. The seams in the motel's structure had widened now, exposing endless corridors in every direction. They branched off infinitely, a fractal nightmare of hallways, each one leading to another, each one containing another her. And they all stared back, their eyes locked on her like mirrors that refused to break. She stumbled toward the lobby, or what used to be the lobby. The desk was there, but warped, stretched into a grotesque monument of wood and flesh. The clerk stood behind it, smiling as always, but his grin was wider now, his skin slick with something wet, his eyes replaced by gaping voids that stared without blinking. He spoke her name without moving his lips. Hannah. Her stomach lurched at the sound. It wasn't just her name, it was her name spoken in every possible version of her voice, overlapping, harmonizing into a note that shook her bones. You are the last. She shook her head violently, tears stinging her eyes. No. No, Ethan, he's still here. I can find him, I can. The clerk tilted his head, the skin of his face cracking at the motion, splitting open to reveal flashes of teeth beneath. He is here. He has always been here. As you have always been here. She staggered backward, hitting the counter. No, we just came here. We were on the road, we. Her voice caught in her throat. The memory splintered. What road? What destination? She tried to picture their car, their belongings, the map on Ethan's phone, but the details slipped like oil through her fingers. Every time she grasped for them, she saw something else instead, herself and Ethan at the check-in desk, signing their names, over and over, across decades, across centuries. Sometimes they were dressed differently, sometimes younger, sometimes older, sometimes not human at all. But always there. Always checking in. The clerk leaned forward, his grin stretching impossibly. You checked in long ago. You never left. None of you ever do. Her chest seized with panic. The air grew heavier, pressing down like a weight on her lungs. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Around her, the lobby stretched, cracking open to reveal the infinite motel beyond, layer upon layer of rooms stacked on top of each other like a hive. Each one contained her, and each one contained Ethan, or what had once been Ethan, performing the same motions, trapped in endless variations of their suffering. A chorus of voices rose, the sound of every version of herself whispering in perfect unison. You are the last guest. When you stop fighting, the cycle completes. Her legs trembled violently, threatening to give way. She wanted to deny it, to scream that she wasn't part of this, that she was real and whole and free. But deep down, beneath the terror, a sliver of truth gnawed at her. The motel wasn't just trapping them. It was them. Every wall, every hallway, every locked door, it all pulsed with their memories, their fears, their lives. And now, with Ethan gone, it was down to her. The walls shuddered again, the heartbeat behind them pounding louder, faster, demanding surrender. The lights flickered in stuttering spasms, blinding flashes that revealed grotesque glimpses of what awaited, rooms filled with skeletal guests clawing at their beds, faces peeling away to reveal nothing beneath. Each flash was worse than the last, until her vision blurred, her mind fraying at the edges. She clutched her chest, sinking to the floor. The motel wanted her to give in, to stop resisting, to accept her role as the last anchor. She could feel it pulling her down, weaving her into its rotten foundation. Her body was already failing, her hands looked pale, translucent, veins glowing faintly as though her blood no longer belonged to her. "No," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not staying here. I won't." The clerk tilted his head again, his voice booming in every corner of her skull. "You already have." Her vision went black. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, heavy and suffocating. She thought she was gone, dead, consumed, erased. But then, her eyes snapped open. She was standing at the motel desk again. Ethan was beside her, smiling softly, pen in hand. The register sat open before them, a blank line waiting. "Just need your name here," the clerk said, his grin wide, his eyes unreadable. Hannah's heart dropped. The pen was already in her hand. She looked down at the register. Dozens, hundreds, of signatures filled the pages, all written in her handwriting. Every one of them the same name. Her name. The line stretched back so far the ink had faded into stains. She flipped the page, and the next was full too. Every page was hers. Her hand trembled violently, the pen tip pressing into the paper. She wanted to drop it, to scream, to run, but her body betrayed her. Her hand moved on its own, looping the letters perfectly, spelling out her name once again. The moment she finished, the page turned itself. Another blank line waited. Another pen appeared in her hand. And the motel exhaled. The walls stopped shaking. The seams closed. The heartbeat steadied. Everything returned to stillness. Hannah looked at Ethan, desperate, tears streaming. "We'll never leave, will we?" Ethan didn't answer. He only smiled, the same wide, frozen smile of the doubles, his eyes hollow. The clerk leaned forward, whispering in a voice that belonged to no one and everyone. "Welcome back." And with that, Hannah finally understood the truth, there was no checking out. There never had been. The never-ending motel was not a place she was trapped in. It was a place she had always been. Forever.